Most people remember where a story begins. They remember the moment something happened, the headline that followed, and the reaction that spread through the community. But very few people follow that story all the way to the end. Not because it isn't important, but because the ending doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, and usually out of view. In 2009, a police response in Rockford turned into a foot chase. That chase didn't stay outside. It didn't stay contained. It moved into a church. And inside that church was the House of Grace daycare. That's where Mark Anthony Barmore was shot and killed by Rockford police. The estate lawsuit later named the city of Rockford and officers Oda Poole and Stan North. Most people remember that part. What they don't always remember is what it turned into. This video is based on publicly available reports, records, and documented cases. It is for educational and documentary purposes only. Hey there, how are you doing? My name is Angel, and I like all things that are mysterious. Do you know what's mysterious today? Not just what happened that day, but what happened after. Because when you actually follow this case all the way through, it doesn't end with a shooting. It ends with something much bigger.
The situation began when Rockford police were attempting to take Barmore into custody on a warrant connected to felony probation violations and for questioning connected to domestic violence complaints. According to the City of Rockford statement reported by Northern Public Radio, what started outside did not stay outside. The situation escalated into a foot pursuit, and Barmore fled into Kingdom Authority International Ministries Church, where House of Grace daycare was operating. That location matters. A church is supposed to feel like a place of safety, community, and refuge. A daycare is supposed to feel even more protected than that. So when a police pursuit ended inside a church daycare with children and workers present, the setting itself became part of the public reaction. Inside that building during that encounter, Barmore was shot and killed. Public accounts differ about the final seconds. The city statement says a grand jury found the use of force justified after an investigation by Illinois State Police working with the Cook County Public Integrity Unit. While later civil litigation and reporting focused heavily on what happened before the shots were fired and whether the daycare should have been cleared first. That was the moment the public saw. That was the headline. That was the shock. But that was not the end of the case. The reaction in Rockford was immediate. People didn't just hear about it, they felt it. There were protests, questions, and public anger. Northern Public Radio settlement article even used an image from 2009 showing Rockford residents marching near the county jail to protest Barmore's shooting. For a while, the case stayed visible. It was discussed in the community, covered in local media, and tied to broader conversations about trust between police and residents. But over time, like so many cases, the public attention faded. New headlines replaced it. The city moved forward, but legally and financially, the Barmore case was still unfolding.
The first major financial outcome came from the wrongful death and excessive force lawsuit filed by Barmore's estate. In December 2014, Rockford City Council approved a settlement agreement in the federal case Estate of Barmore versus the City of Rockford. The estate received $1.1 million from the City of Rockford. The settlement dismissed the claims with prejudice, and the city and individual defendants did not admit liability or fault. That part matters. A settlement is not the same thing as a courtroom finding of guilt, but it is still a financial resolution. It is still public money being used to close a case. And in this case, it took more than 5 years after the shooting for that first major payout to happen. For many people, that $1.1 million number became the simplified version of the Barmore case. But that was not the full cost. The second financial outcome came from the people inside the church and daycare. This is the part that gives the case a much bigger weight. Because Barmore was not shot in an empty building, there were children and adult daycare workers present. In 2016, a jury awarded $360,000 in damages for reckless infliction of emotional distress connected to the shooting inside a House of Grace daycare. Reporting from the Associated Press stated that the jury awarded $30,000 each to 10 children who witnessed the shooting and $60,000 total to 2 workers. The jury did not award damages to the owners of the facility, and the award was below the $4 million sought in the lawsuit. This was not the same as the estate settlement. This was a separate legal outcome tied to the same shooting, focused on the emotional distress suffered by people who were inside the daycare when it happened. Sandberg Law's case summary states that the plaintiffs were awarded $360,000 after an 11-day trial, and it also notes that the city had already spent nearly $600,000 defending the lawsuits by that time. So now the Barmore case is no longer just one payout. It is the estate settlement, plus a jury awarded for children and workers who witnessed what happened. And yet there's still a third financial outcome. The third payout is the one that makes people stop and really look at the what happened afterward question. In 2017, the city of Rockford reached a settlement with Officer Oda Poole, one of the officers involved in that fatal shooting. WIFR reported that Poole had been placed on paid administrative leave in August 2009 after the shooting, was fired from the Rockford Police Department in July 2011 when the city alleged he was unfit for duty, and after a series of legal actions, the city agreed to pay him $700,000 in workers' compensation, paid over 4 years. As part of the deal, Poole retired from the Rockford Police Department in good standing. That's just sick. That is the part that changes the story. Because now you have a case where the city paid Barmore's estate, a jury awarded money to children and workers inside the daycare, and then the city also paid one of the officers involved. Those are 3 separate financial outcomes connected to the same shooting. And then the story kept going. In 2021, WIFR reported that Oda Poole announced he was running for Boone County Sheriff. That same report identified him as one of the officers involved in the 2009 shooting of Mark Barmore and repeated the history. Paid administrative leave after the shooting, fired in 2011, a $700,000 workers' compensation settlement in 2017, and retirement from Rockford Police in good standing. That detail matters because it shows how far the aftermath can stretch. This wasn't just a shooting, a lawsuit, a payout, and silence. One of the officers involved later attempted to move into an elected law enforcement leadership role. That does not mean voters had to support him. It does not mean he was automatically guilty of wrongdoing. But it absolutely belongs in the story because it answers the question this whole video is asking. What happens after? In this case, after the shooting, after the lawsuits, after the estate settlement, after the daycare verdict, and after the workers' compensation settlement, and after retirement in good standing, Oda Poole later ran for sheriff. That is not a small footnote. That is part of the timeline. When most people talk about the Barmore case, they usually talk about the $1.1 million settlement, but that number alone does not tell the full story. The estate settlement was $1,115,500. The daycare emotional distress award was $360,000. The Oda Pool workers' compensation settlement was $700,000. Together, those three financial outcomes add up to $2,175,500. And that still does not include everything else. Legal fees, staff time, outside reviews, years of litigation, public meetings, public trust, and the emotional cost that never fits neatly into a budget line. Sandberg Law's summary noted that by the time of the 2016 daycare verdict, Rockford had already spent nearly $600,000 defending the lawsuits. So when people say the Barmore case cost Rockford $1.1 million, that is only one part of the story. The fuller number tied to the public financial outcomes is more than $2.1 million. When you hear about a lawsuit against police, the headline usually focuses on one thing: the amount. But almost nobody asks the next question: who actually pays that? The simple answer: here's the reality. In most cases, it's not the officer. It's not even the department directly. It's the city, which means it's taxpayer money. That means people who had nothing to do with the incident are the ones funding the outcome. Let's break it down simply. An incident happens. A lawsuit is filed. The city's legal team gets involved. Settlement is reached or case is lost. And then the money is paid out. Sometimes that money comes from city budgets, insurance pools, risk management funds. But no matter how you slice it, public money is always involved. Because every dollar that goes toward a settlement is a dollar that's not going somewhere else. Not to schools, not to infrastructure, not to community programs. And over time, that adds up. Here's where it gets deeper. If an individual doesn't personally feel the financial impact, then what changes? This is what people refer to as an accountability gap. Because the consequences exist, but they are distributed differently. Now bring this back to Rockford. Over the years, there have been cases, lawsuits, and payouts tied to policing, and each one follows the same structure: incident, investigation, legal process, and then a settlement. And again, the money doesn't just disappear. It comes from somewhere. This isn't just a Rockford issue. It's a national pattern. And once you see it, you start asking different questions. Not just what happened, but who pays for what happened. The Barmore case matters because it shows how one incident can fracture into multiple legal paths. One path belonged to the estate. Another belonged to the church, daycare workers, and children. And yet another belonged to Officer Poole. Each path had a different legal theory, a different outcome, and a different payment. And that is exactly why this case needs to be told as a story, not as a single headline. A headline says, "City settles Barmore case." A full case file says, "The city paid the estate, a jury awarded damages to children and workers, and the city later paid one of the officers involved, and that officer later ran for sheriff." That is the difference between remembering a case and actually following it. The Barmore case did not end inside that church. It did not end with protests. It did not end with the first settlement. It continued through lawsuits, jury awards, workers' compensation, retirement in good standing, and even a later run for sheriff. When you follow the story all the way through, you don't just see what happened. You see what it became. And that is what makes this case so important. Because if we only remember the moment of the shooting, we miss the full machine that came after. And on that note, if you liked this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you would like to see more videos like this. Please subscribe. And as always, I appreciate you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a good day, and please be safe out there.